Hi everyone, it's Dr. Kamari Valentine and it's Valentine's Day and I really wanted to record something for today, even if it was very short. So today can be a day that brings up all sorts of feelings. Some of the negative feelings that might come up include loneliness or sadness, disappointment, anger, feeling irritated, and more. The commercial nature of Valentine's Day is also a big issue. There are huge commercial pressures and gigantic marketing forces compelling us to buy things, as well as an expectation or image about what love looks like. What I'd like to talk about is this notion of us having different parts and what deep self-care might look like, especially in relation to Valentine's Day and the feelings that arise. So let me take a step back and talk about this business of parts. You might have heard me talking about this before. So it is normal for us to have parts. It doesn't mean that we have multiple personality disorder, although that can be an issue that people face. We all have parts. There are no bad parts. This idea of our personality or our self having distinct modes or collections of memories or parts is in several therapies. I was introduced to this almost 2 decades ago when I learned schema therapy and was a therapist on a randomized trial comparing schema therapy to cognitive behavior therapy, which was at that stage the gold standard therapy in the treatment of depression. So schema therapy is an absolutely wonderful therapy. It was developed by Jeff Young, and in that therapy, we look at patterns that have been created that were necessary for survival, but that no longer might serve us. And we might cluster those patterns into these parts of the self. So 4 parts I talk about routinely are the vulnerable child part, although there can be so many child parts, healthy adult, detached protector, and the critic. Let me say a little bit more about each of those. So the vulnerable child part is the housing of memories associated with feeling small, vulnerable, young, and our needs not being met. When we're in vulnerable child, we might feel very small. Our voice might change. The memories we access might be different. Our body language might change. We might seem different than when we're in healthy adult. And each person's healthy adult varies. But this is a space in which we feel grounded, flexible, we're connected with our values, and we're connected with ourself. Detached protector is a space in which we're zoned out, not fully there. And we are distanced somewhat from intense feelings. Finally, the critic, which is one of my favorite parts to pick on, is about that very critical, punitive, negative part of ourself that perhaps has high expectations. And this part might have started because of people we knew in our early environments. People who perhaps had very high expectations of us, who put us down, who made demands of us. And while initially what we had was their voice, later we don't need them to be present to hear their voice or what they have to say present within us. So on Valentine's Day, it is easy for that vulnerable child to be activated. I would say it is understandable why that vulnerable child would be activated. And there are memories, both present and past, that might come to the surface. Memories of being neglected, uncared for, our needs not being met, disappointed, lonely, sad, and more. Now, there's a saying that wherever there's a vulnerable child mode, there is likely to be a critic. Okay, so alongside those feelings, we might have a critic that tells us off, puts us down, and says things like, "You shouldn't be so silly. It's silly to think this. Valentine's Day is meaningless." Now, the problem with that, and people can argue about that is a logical thought to have or not. The problem is that when saying those things to ourselves, and this saying might not even be something we're conscious of, when saying those things, we don't necessarily feel any better, any more grounded, any more present, or any more in contact with our values. One of the first things I ask people to do is start noticing these parts to themselves. That being in vulnerable child is different from being in the critic or being in a healthy adult. While many people can spot that vulnerable child mode, even though they don't like this part and try to remove themselves from this part, it is harder for people to know the critic. The critic can sound logical. The critic can seem reasonable. There's a saying in schema therapy that modes fight to stay alive. We can hear the critic and then hear justification, like, I should think that way because if I don't, I'll just be lazy. Or if I don't think this way, then I'll just abandon everything and I won't have dreams and ambitions. I won't get anything done. The critic is the equivalent of having a coach with a very punishing style. Sure, things might get done, but there are an awful lot of feelings that don't necessarily help the human being. It is also the case that black and white thinking, such as I should do this or this is the right way to do things, sets us up for failure and actually can demotivate us. So, one of the things I ask people to do when they're noticing the parts is to really notice the language that we use for ourselves. Notice, for example, that you feel overwhelmed or sad, and that there is a critic that says something like, "You shouldn't feel this way. Get over it." There might be actual external critics that feed these beliefs. The critic does not come out of nowhere. Your vulnerable child too exists because of actual memories. So this is what I call deep self-care, getting to see all of ourselves and these parts, getting to really hold these feelings, becoming receptive and not blocking thoughts or feelings. When we respond with compassion and kindness to this part, this vulnerable part, and acknowledge that we have needs, we are then engaged in the process of deep healing. It is easy to get into what I would say are distraction techniques to displace those feelings of sadness, to distract ourselves, to be doing things that placate our critic, that appear to be in healthy adult, but that ignore that vulnerable child on the inside. So my strongest message, regardless of Valentine's Day, but especially on Valentine's Day, is that the best thing we can do for ourselves is to really notice and acknowledge that inner child, that vulnerable child, to say, I see you. It makes sense that you feel this way. I'm here for you. And what we might do when we have those sensations is we might tap. We might tap our chest, this sternum area. What we do when we're tapping is we are reassuring. We're also tapping acupressure points that can help. And we're sitting with feelings rather than trying to change them, chase them, make them something else. We're saying, this is fair enough. So deep breath in, take a deep breath in, breathing in, breathe out. And I'd like to invite you to make room for that young part of you, the part of you that we all have, and to acknowledge at least that that part exists. And if it feels all right, perhaps to send love to that part. So this Valentine's Day, a choice you have is about directing love inward. The love that you seek is there inside of you. Deep breath in and breathe out. So today we went perhaps a bit deeper than usual. Hopefully you've heard me before, and this wasn't a weird introduction to what we talk about here. I'd love to know what you thought and what came up for you. I can be reached on Facebook. My Facebook page is Dr. Kumari NZ on Facebook and Instagram. And I'd love to hear what you would like to hear as a follow-up episode to this. So thank you so much for listening. If you would like more auditory support, some exercises that accompany what I've said, you can find my albums on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and more by searching for Dr. Kumari Valentine or Kumari Valentine. So thank you so much for listening. Happy Valentine's Day to you, you who matter. And I wish you all deep self-care and healing. Talk soon.